Thank you. The second and final session of the day is on a very important subject: climate change in Africa, vulnerabilities and options for building resilience, to be moderated by Mr. Joseph Warungu. I lost count of the number of times that Mr. Joseph Warungu has been to this security symposium. He is one of our most decorated moderators. I think we need to get a medal for such participants. And this applies to many others, like Dr. Zenebe, Dr. Goloba Mutevi, and many others. So thank you very much for your continuous participation in our national security symposiums. So Mr. Joseph Warungu is a media and communication consultant with 30 years of journalism experience. He was head of the BBC African News and Current Affairs Department and a former Knight International Journalism Fellow who is widely traveled in Africa, working as a journalist, trainer, and moderator of public debates on radio and television. Warungu specializes in media management training and enhancing the capacity of media to tell in-depth and compelling stories on development issues such as health, education, business, and technology. He also runs Top Story, a national mentorship program of young journalists in Kenya in partnership with 25 universities. Warungu has a Master's in Arts in Media Management from the University of Leeds, United Kingdom. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Warungu to the podium.
Chief of Defense Staff, Service Chiefs present, heads of security organs also present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm marking a big anniversary today. This is the 10th anniversary of this villager from Kenya attending these symposiums all the way from 2015 to today. And I keep I enjoy every moment of it, and it's really a pleasure to make this annual pilgrimage to Rwanda. So I feel completely at home. I'm still learning the language slowly, and other benefits would follow. Now, today, we have an important issue to address, and it will keep us awake because it's so critical. Before I just get into that, just to set the scene for what this is all about. I've come from Kenya, a country that, as you all know, has been completely flooded, overwhelmed by rains we've never seen before. So I've got a couple of very short clips that I wanted to share here. I'm sparing you those very gory ones that were going around. This is something a little different, just to bring our minds back into the reality of where we're at. So here goes with the first clip, which I'll explain as it plays.
He's going inside in the other garden too.
Yes.
Eh?
Yes. Can you go there?
Yeah, go.
We'll go back or
Wait, I want to go.
Continue.
No. Keep going there, kidogo. Just kidogo. What? Okay, go. Unbelievable.
So what you see here, this is one of the poshest neighborhoods of Nairobi. It's called Rwanda. It's where the high and mighty live. Strangely enough, in the 2019 National Population Census in Kenya, they asked a very strange question. Do you own a boat? And people really complained about it. They found it a very irritating question. Not anymore. Okay, we can stop that there. It's just to give you a sense of what was happening in the middle of Nairobi. Partly because that estate is on very flat ground, so when the rains came, like they've never come before, it was completely flooded. The second clip is very personal to me because this is my own house, one of those flooded days in Nairobi. Clip 2. And that was the entire ground floor, the kitchen, all the carpets completely destroyed in just one day, actually in a matter of hours. Now this is nothing compared to the almost 250 people that we lost in Kenya to the floods, maybe 100, just slightly over 100 in Tanzania, and then thousands who were displaced. So if ever there was any doubt about these extreme climate events, those doubts were erased. The roads in Nairobi right now are completely impassable. So traffic jams at Nairobi, I think after Lagos in Africa, Nairobi is the second craziest place to try and drive, partly because we don't have too much patience, I think. So those roads are completely, in a really bad way. The expressway that takes you these days in a matter of minutes from anywhere in the middle of Nairobi right up to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, when it floods or when it was flooded, it too, the cars could hardly move, and we lost a lot of people, a lot of people who do their business on motorbikes, we call them bodabodas, really had a rough time. So part of the reason we're here is to look for solutions to this kind of issues. So in my panel today, I would like to invite my guests on board. Let me start with Juliet, if you can come on board. So Juliet Kabera is the Director General of the Rwanda Environment Management Authority, or REMA. She plays the role of a regulator. She has lived this reality, and it's her responsibility to make sure that this country at least keeps safe in terms of environmental challenges and damages. So thank you very much indeed. My next guest has come all the way from Zimbabwe. Come along, please, Professor Innocent CHIRISA. He's Vice Chancellor of Zimbabwe Ezekiel Gutu University. This is a man who sleeps and dreams about urban development and planning, and he's got some very interesting thoughts to share. Also proud to say that this is a holder of 2 PhDs. I don't know how we get to the first one, but Prof, you're very welcome. And then my third guest this afternoon, Teddy Mugabo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Rwanda Green Fund. Now she has that difficult job which a lot of countries in Africa are struggling with, which is climate finance. How do you finance the business of going clean or going green with your energy? That sits squarely at her docket, so she'll share her thoughts on experiences so far. Finally, last but not least, Professor Beth Kaplin. She's a senior researcher at the Center for Excellence in Biodiversity and Natural Resource Management at the University of Rwanda. Again, she's got some interesting perspectives, which we shall get into in a moment. So that's my panel. Apologies to 2 of our guests who should have been on, but for understandable reasons, they could not make it onto this trip. So please, a warm welcome to the panelists. I think I said it here once before. I'm named after my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was a traditional healer who used to lead prayers, and this was pre-colonial days. Used to lead prayers even for rain, and that was his profession. That's what he was known as, so-called rainmakers. And I'm glad I chose journalism, because if I had gone his way, I would sadly be out of a livelihood. But I still, carry his tricks and, some of the things that he was known for. So this is the way we'll run this panel. I prefer to have it more as a conversation rather than, a lot of maybe, and also to give opportunities to you guys to ask questions, because this issue is really quite critical. So I'll give each of the panelists 3 minutes to come and give their opening remarks and lay out their case. And then after that, I may follow up with a couple of questions, and then we'll have a general discussion about everything. The brief for the panel is simple. This is a security symposium. Where do you locate climate change crisis within, within that security spectrum? And having gone through all the challenges that we're facing, the things that we need to do, what are the solutions? And what do we need to do in the meantime? So we've got a planner in the mix, we've got a regulator in the mix, you've got all the people that should work, and you've got someone who looks after or tries to find the money to do all these kind of things. So that's how we'll do it, and then we'll get into the general discussion. I hope from here we can come away with some real practical solutions that we can live by. Our Met department in Kenya says we're not done yet. It's been dry, it's been stable for the last few weeks, but they said you can expect anything between now and the month of June. And just for the record, this is nowhere near. Our rainy season is usually in April, and January is the hottest period of the year in Kenya. Not anymore. We started those small rains in January, and we're not out of the pit yet. So this will be a fascinating, and I must say, really critical discussion. For our colleagues and students who are going to, the enemy now may not necessarily carry a grenade, they may not carry armed aircraft. The enemy is right outside your door, as you'll hear from these experiences. So let me, without wasting much time, invite Juliet you can choose to speak from here.
Honorable CDS, heads of security organs in the room today, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, good afternoon. My name is Juliet, as earlier introduced. It's an honor for me to join this discussion this afternoon. They say climate change is like an enemy that does not play by the rules. It never shows up on time, just like we saw in Kenya, and it doesn't follow a predictable strategy. But as Army officers, I was going to say we, but you know a thing or two about adapting and overcoming. So let's talk about how we can build resilience against this unpredictable enemy called climate change. One of the most pressing challenges, as projected earlier, that Africa is facing is climate change. As we explore its impacts, we must confront the security challenges climate change poses to our continent. We also have to appreciate its intricate effects on our social, political, and economic landscape, and discuss practical solutions for building resilience. First, let us examine the security concerns linked to climate change. The impacts on food, the impacts on water, and energy supply are profound, increasing competition over decreasing natural resources. Climate-related disasters lead to forced migration and displacements, and all these threaten livelihoods and regional stability. In 2023 alone, Africa experienced 64 natural disasters, primarily under the sub-Saharan region, resulting over 20,000 deaths and affecting 12.7 million people. In Rwanda, we remember that we lost 131 lives in May 3rd, 2023. Extreme weather events such as the devastating rains in Kenya that we've just seen in pictures highlight the urgent need for coordinated disaster response. Africa's vulnerability to climate change is intensified by its economic dependency on climate-sensitive activities and products, coupled with low adaptive capacity. Weak economies, and this is really hurting to mention, but weak economies, weak institutions, and governance structures hinder effective responses to these problems. According to the Africa Development Bank, climate change is projected to reduce Africa's GDP by up to 2.25% by the year 2030. In Rwanda, climate change reduces our GDP by 1% per year, and the total cost of adapting to climate change is estimated to be $5.3 billion US dollars in the year 2030. The complexity of these impacts climate change is evident in recent events. I want to cite a few in addition to Kenya. In 2023, Johannesburg reported a year of climate massacre with over 15,700 lives lost to extreme weather and 34 million people affected. Heavy rains in Kenya, we just saw that they caused over 228 lives, displacing 190,000 people and damaging infrastructure. In the face of these challenges, we must discuss practical solutions. One critical approach is to enhance the role of the military in disaster response. Climate change worsens the frequency and severity of natural disasters, necessitating a coordinated and immediate response. Militaries can provide pre-positioned aid, such as water, food, and shelter, to ensure rapid assistance during emergencies. Legislative changes obviously might be required to enable such deployments, ensuring that military resources are swiftly mobilized when lives are at risk. Moreover, the military can play a crucial role in resilience building efforts. By focusing on climate change, on climate resilient farming and food production, we can enhance food security. Military medical resources should be utilized to treat climate-related diseases, such as vector-borne diseases and cholera during floods. The military can also explore reforestation to offset carbon emissions, not only for carbon market potentials, but also for increasing resilience. The military's credibility and extensive reach can make it an effective vehicle for raising awareness and communicating vital meteorological information to communities. Additionally, the military can employ the state-of-the-art technology to establish or support early warning and monitoring systems for disasters to improve readiness for extreme weather events. In conclusion, Africa stands at a critical juncture in the fight against climate change, but by leveraging practical solutions, partially through the military, we can build resilience and safeguard our continent's future. Together, we can turn the tide on climate change and secure a sustainable, prosperous Africa for generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. I've just got one question for you. How much time do we have to do the things that we need to do?
We were supposed to do them yesterday. We don't have time.
How do we, so how do we catch up with that time?
I think not all is lost. What we just went through is an eye-opener. We now see that it's real. First, we had to struggle with understanding what climate change was. And second, we used to think it's an exaggerated problem. It's no longer an exaggerated problem. It's no longer a question to be responded to by professors such as Beth. We are all seeing and living with the impacts of climate change. And without being a prophet of doom, it's only going to get worse. So we just need to build our adaptive capacity and make sure that we have everyone in this struggle. Otherwise, our very hard-earned economic development is going to be affected as we go on. Thank you.
Are there some specific steps that you've taken at RIMA to help address this situation?
Yes, so we started by understanding the problem, first of all. So we have done projections. We need to understand how do we plan, because it all starts with the planning. If you cannot plan for the right budget, the right resources to be in place, you cannot tackle the problem as it grows. So we started with carrying out projections for the next 100 years to see how much precipitation are we going to get, how much rains, what is the intensity, and that we understand. And this is what informs the economic development strategies that we make. This is what informs the short-term and long-term strategies of the government. So then we can mobilize the resources and make sure that whatever we are putting across as development strategies are climate-proofed. Thank you.
So, did I hear you right? Did you say a 100-year plan?
Yeah.
We're struggling with 5
Projection.
and 10.
No, it's projection.
Projections,
Yeah,
that's right.
of climate data.
Thank you very much indeed. Professor CHIRISA, please come and share your experiences from Southern Africa. If you want to speak from there, you're more than welcome.
Thank you very much for bringing me to this forum, and then for this time to share with you. Coming from Zimbabwe, I'm an urban and regional planner by training, and I've had more than 18 years of experience in the classroom. And I would say one of the modules that I taught for quite some time is environmental planning, or environmental systems and planning. And what I've seen as a shift was when we started some 20 or so years ago, it was just a static teaching, like just it's a textbook issue. But the dynamics now which we experience, it means the environment has been reawakened. And what is the major trigger? It is climate change. I will tell you, in 2019, in Zimbabwe, although we've experienced a number of cyclones, I think from 2000, Cyclone Eileen, among other cyclones, the 2019 cyclone was quite devastating in that this Cyclone Idai, as it is called, it shook us because the cyclone came through the Mozambican Channel into Zimbabwe. We've always thought we were safe because we are landlocked. But this time, it entered right into our territory. What did we notice? After some more than 24 hours of intense rain, we saw and we heard huge boulders of rocks being moved, infrastructure being uprooted. And this was unheard of. We had never experienced such. Of course, there are so many other theories. Others could attribute it to spirituality, that maybe the gods are crazy. But when we closely look at it, it left some fears. Now that when there's even some clouds hanging over there, communities that were directly affected especially in the Manicaland province, which is eastern Zimbabwe, they freeze when the weather changes. So what am I saying? What we used to think was something far distant, which could not affect us, has now become part of our life. And we have to, nothing but to prepare. Then this year, or the 2023-2024 season, particularly in Southern Africa, we talk of South Africa, Namibia, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe. It has witnessed a very dry climatic event, the El Nino effect. And I will tell you, the extreme weather events that are associated with climate change, they are wreaking havoc, and we are living with that reality. That's when you see a farmer having spent all the time preparing to plant, even to plow, invest in fertilizers, then the crop, everything is just lost. So it's a double loss in the investment, and eventually also loss. And what does this bring into our minds? Now, how are the people going to survive? Because they are also faced with famine. There are no jobs. And in the morning, we heard about the radicalization of the youth. Coming from a university environment, I would say Zimbabwe alone, in 1 year, it produces about 40,000 graduates who are going to be facing unemployment, now facing the other challenge of famine, no jobs. I think we've just heard Juliet talking about how climate change also has reduced, and they have seen the effect, reducing the GDP of the country. So that is the extent to which climate change has become a serious hazard and risk at the same time, which we are experiencing at this moment. And it poses then as a security threat, a security issue, the radicalization of the youth, which I heard in the morning. It's quite possible. We have even begun to experience increased safety challenges in various places, be it rural or urban areas. When people are not having the food, not having the jobs, when they have to face life, it's a matter of livelihoods. And the question, and in literature which is coming out, do we need to look at the livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods framework that was posed by people like Chambers in the early 90s? Does this still fit, or we have to rephrase it so that we speak to the new realities? So I would say our countries really are in a serious and dire state, which calls for action. And maybe before I hand over to you again, Joseph, in Zimbabwe, I wouldn't know, but last year in November, the president made what he's calling a call for action. And as a planner, if you come to Zimbabwe this year, every planner is busy. What are we doing? In the 92 local authorities that are in the country, we are doing master plans. And we believe that with the master planning, which takes stock of every item in a space, we are going to then come up with the proposals that would see more resilient settlements. But remember, this is planning. And after planning, one other thing which I've realized, planning alone is not enough. Resources have to be there, which makes it also a very serious budgetary issue. up until also governments have that will to consider planning as a budgetary issue, maybe we'll be just also doing the talk show. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. A quick one. How do you distinguish, you've made this, alluded about the link between crime and climate change. How do you make that direct connection as opposed to, an economic downturn, that the country has been on a slowdown? How can you directly attribute the rise in crime or physical harm to climate change?
Well, I would say that climate, we need to see the environment as a system, and a system which affects the natural and the human aspects of, or cultural aspects of that system. When you look at it, once there are shortages because we have experienced, say, drought, or once someone is without disposable income, because also they don't have jobs, because I think it's a myriad of factors, but it's a complex, I would say. We talk of complexity, but one thing, there's that knock-on effect. Climate change then aggravates, the extreme weather events then aggravate certain shortages. I talked about the budget, for example. In the SADC region, 3 days ago, there was a summit just discussing the El Nino effect. And why heads of government spend all that time now discussing this issue? Because it's a directly result of a weather event triggered by climate change, which exacerbates the already challenges that we have. Africa, we are already in a mess. And then more fuel is added to the fire because of climate change. And that's how you then see the impact becoming even more aggravated.
Last one, I'll put you on the spot on this a little bit. We heard from Juliet about the importance of involving, for example, the military, who, even in my own country, who are the only ones who have that capacity to come and sort out some of this mess that we're in. Is it viable in Zimbabwe to draw in the military?
I'm sure the military people, they are disciplined. And, well, maybe that's my supposition. However, I remember in my country some 10 years back, faced with so many of these droughts, there was a deliberate attempt by government to organize what was called Operation Maguta. Kuguta in Shona is satisfy from hunger. And a lot of funding was used in that. And supposedly, it was the military who were supposed to. But I think somewhere things didn't work out too well, because I think the military may be given the responsibility, the mandate, but also do we have the political will to sustain that mandate. So it was an experiment to me that failed, because the disciplined people, maybe they were not given really time and space to be on the ground to really effect the change, because it was supposed to fund some irrigation, get some equipment, invest in all sorts of, but I think there's this capture which happens. And someone in the morning mentioned about corruption. Was it the Major General? There are times when we become also our own enemies. Resources are availed, but I think the worst problem is when someone wants to eat the seed and rather not the fruit.
Thank you. Quite interesting. Now, Tede Mugabo, I'm going to turn to you, and I must say, in my other life, I am a trainer of editors and African journalists when it comes to climate change. And as part of that, I've had the privilege of interviewing a number of African presidents from Kenya, Comoros, and Malawi. And they all cry about the same thing. Listen, we hardly ever pollute, it's hardly above 4%, it's below that. We make, we produce the least emissions, but we are worst hit. And when they come to share that beautiful cake, I don't know whether it's velvet or whatever it's made of, between the countries, Africa gets a pretty raw deal. Now, you're in the money business. I hope that's something that you can, those concerns you can address. Please, welcome.
Thank you. First and foremost, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to discuss this topic. So maybe I dive directly into the money, just to give it some background. It is true that when you look at the issues of climate change, yes, you do have the contributors, so the developed countries that have, due to the industrialization phase, they had to, basically it was economies that were based on fossil fuels, so that resulted into a significant amount of emissions of carbon dioxide, which the developing part of the world, we did not really contribute to, but we are experiencing, we are only experiencing the impacts. However, due to the different capacities, the developing countries actually are the ones that are being hit the most. Now, to your question, when you look at the different COPs, I'm sure you've heard of COP, which is the climate, it's the COP of what is it again? Conference of Parties, which is basically a climate change conference that is organized every year to discuss the issues at hand. And oftentimes, the topic around the 100 billion. So there's a figure, $100 billion that have been, quote unquote, sort of committed by the developed countries that this money will be flowing on an annual basis, but that hasn't happened. However, I would like to now bring back the conversation to Rwanda, because I think one of the things that we see is we can't always also be out there complaining. It's actually how do we position ourselves to be able to even tap into that small piece of cake that is available. So which I think the government of Rwanda has done very well. One, it's an obligation. So climate change is impacting all of us. So therefore, as under the UN and under the Paris Agreement, it's an obligation for the countries to all come together to agree on how to tackle this problem that affects everybody. So just to say, the government of Rwanda was the first African country to review its NDC. So the NDC is pretty much the climate action plan. So in 2020, very ambitious, we made an ambitious target and said, we are going to, we're going to develop, but in a sustainable manner. And I think it's also important to highlight this. We don't need to choose between we don't need to choose between development and addressing climate change, but rather, how do we, develop in a climate-compatible way, since we know that if we ignore it, it's also going to impact us. So I think, so from that, we made an ambitious target to reduce carbon emissions by 38% by the year 2030. And we did further, so with the, under the Ministry of Environment and REMA, studies were done to even estimate. We want to make sure that we also understand what is going to be the cost for us to actually achieve this target, which Juliet alluded to earlier. And there's this target to basically, in order for us to achieve this target of reducing carbon emissions by 38% by 2030 is 11 billion. Now, we've done further studies to say where are we. And right now, we're looking at a gap of 6.5 billion. So just wanted to provide that, that background. Now, the other point I want to highlight is, again, why does it matter? Now, coming to Rwanda, why does it really matter for us to take this issue of climate change serious? When you look at several studies, and I think there was a study on the economics of climate change, and recently there's a World Bank, it's called CCDR. Basically, it says that, between, and I'm sure the number has increased, but the last time I checked, 2.5% of our GDP was lost on an annual basis. So currently, The GDP is around 13 billion. Now think about it, 2.5%, that's approximately 800 million a year. Now, that is quite significant for a country like Rwanda, where, I mean, also for any country, we have many different needs, you know. We need, as a country, we need to develop different sectors. So if we don't take this seriously and then keep losing this, you know, this is a huge figure for our economy. So really wanted to emphasize that. Now, that's where really the government prioritized addressing climate change, developing in a compatible manner, and that's where you see our policy. So we have 2050. When you look at our Vision 2050, we want to be a carbon neutral economy. We want to develop, but again, really taking this seriously. We have so many strategies, but even beyond that, now where I come to introduce the fund, the government, I think my colleagues here, you talked about it, we can do all this talk. We can say it's important, and we can talk about the impacts, but at the end of the day, if we don't have the resources, the financial resources to address the issues, then it doesn't really make sense. And I think that's where, again, the government of Rwanda has done an amazing job to say, you know what, we'll establish a fund, a financing vehicle, which can really play the role of resource mobilization. So that's what we do at the Rwanda Green Fund. We work with partners, bilateral partners, as well as multilateral, and we're busy mobilizing financing. Of course, when you look at the needs and what we're mobilizing, yes, there's still a big gap, but we also have a role to catalyze. So we recently worked with the Development Bank of Rwanda. So we're going out there, working with our Ministry of Finance, working with the financial sector and saying, guys, look, first of all, there's also money out there. How do we unlock it? How do we mobilize the funding? So at the fund, over the last, it's been what? The fund was established in 2012, so close to, now it's 12 years. We've been able to mobilize up to $300 million. And the way we work is we mobilize funds through a basket fund, and we issue calls for applications. I hope you've seen some of these. We constantly, whenever the money is in the basket, we put out calls for applications, and we've been able to invest in both public, mainly public sector, but recently we've really, I think as of last year, we're being very aggressive in terms of how do we also, get to support the private sector. So just to name the sector, when you look at the sectors that the government, or looking at the NDC or even the fund level, these are not new sectors. They're really priority sectors. So when we invest in projects, we're looking at agriculture. We know that 70% of our population relies on agriculture, which is rain-fed agriculture. So it's still really subsistence farming, which means this is actually where the biggest challenge is. If almost the entire 70% of our population relies on this sector that is highly impacted by climate change, we do need to place a focus on that. So we invest in projects of agriculture. We've invested, I don't know if some of you have heard of Green Gicumbi. These are big projects. It's a big project that is being implemented in 9 sectors of Gicumbi district, where we're working with farmers, like tea farmers, teaching them about the techniques. How do you, sometimes you have too much rain. How do you capture that rain? Sometimes you don't have water. So it's really techniques. When it's too much, how do you store it? When it's not there, how do you, how do you improve your infrastructure, drainage systems? But there's also another important element of our population, our abaturage bacu. So whatever we do is not just, yes, there's the climate change, but I think you mentioned it, you said, it's the livelihoods. And really, when you look at the people that are mostly affected by climate change, it's the poorest. So the poorest people who are living in high-risk zones. I'm sure we all experienced what happened last year in May, where 130 lives were lost. And to be quite frank, that's where we also place an emphasis. It's like, where should we invest where we can see the most impact? So in some of the components, we make sure that we're looking at the livelihoods that are vulnerable, that are living in areas of high-risk zone. We relocate them, put green village models where they can, again, we try to bring in the sustainability, water storage, using technology such as solar panels, but also livelihoods. We need to make sure that we're addressing their livelihoods. So whether it's farming, but like making sure that these people, when tomorrow there's a shock, they'll be able to sustain. Now, last but not least, so we've also invested in, the likes of well, Rema developed a program. I hope you've all been to Nyantungo Eco Park. So, you know, Rema looking really at the wetlands, you know, sort of overseeing the wetlands, but we also try to say, how do we make them productive? Yes, we're protecting them, so they submitted a proposal, and now we have Nyantungo Eco Park, and maybe Juliet can add more. There's more to come, but whatever we're doing is, yes, we're preserving the environment, we are building resilience against climate change, but it's also people at the center. At the end of the day, whatever we do it's for the people. Now, last but not least, I also wanted to, although we've been talking about the threat, I think there's also an opportunity. And, you know, maybe this sounds a bit weird, but when you look around the globe and around the world right now, whether any investor, when everybody who's talking about deploying capital is really interested in sustainability. So I also do believe that it's an opportunity, again, for Africa. It's how do we prepare ourselves, or how do we make sure that we understand what these investors are looking for, so that we can position ourselves to attract this green financing that is out there. Because really, in the years to come, it's when you look at different, you know, even for us here right now, I know that the central bank has issued guidelines. So in a couple of years, banks will start disclosing. So really, it's the new, it's no longer an issue of the past. Climate change is happening, it's here, it's impacting our economy. And so how do we make sure that we are ready to also tap into this private, you know, the private capital that is out there, considering that we have KIFC, the Kigali International Financial Center, which really has positioned again to attract investors in the sustainable finance. So how do we really position ourselves? And maybe to conclude, back to the question you asked, I think the conversation of the countries from, you know, I'm not speaking on behalf of other countries, but I think what we should be doing is readiness. How do we prepare ourselves to attract this money? Rather than, I know we can complain forever. There's so many problems in the world and unfairness, right? But I don't think that should be, I think as Africans and as developed, we need to really equip ourselves. Like how are we prepared to access this money? Even though the money is not sufficient, how do we make sure that we attract the small piece of the cake? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a small point, because, sorry, you're the money person on the panel. Carbon trading. There are a number of African countries that have gone down that path. Where is Rwanda at? I haven't checked, so I'm relying on your expertise. And also, is this really genuine and sincere, or are we just letting off the polluters when we get into carbon trading?
Thank you for the question, and I also think Juliet can come in. I think, first of all, for Rwanda, last COP, we launched a carbon market framework, because, so, carbon market is just like any market, but there's also two ways in which there's two different markets, if I can call it. There's the regulated market or the voluntary market. So there's a market out there, private sector, you have a project, you can go. Of course, it's really quite something in order for you to get to a point where you're ready to trade. There are, verifiers and all of that. But at least on the side of Rwanda, we had to put in place a framework, because, it's a market that needs to be regulated. Now, I do believe that, the carbon market framework has had its ups and downs, It's also one where, a lot of especially I think on the private sector side, people can, there've been tendency of greenwashing, where, people might claim that they're implementing projects that are green when they are not. So there's been a bit of backlash, but I also do believe that there's an opportunity as long as we do it well. Because right now, for example, on the side, of Rwanda, we do have quite a number of investors who are interested. There's also through the bilateral, so the regulated pathway, we have a number of countries that have expressed interest to buy credits from Rwanda. And what we're doing right now, again, is the readiness, because it is quite it does require for expertise in terms of, valuation. How do you move a project? Basically, start off with a project, be able to monetize it. So there's several processes which we don't shy away that it's also, and it's new for us, and at the moment we're really focusing on getting the expertise, the legal aspects, so that we can, the plan is to have a transaction by the end of this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Finally, we come across to you, Professor Beth. You spend a lot of time researching into how we manage our resources and biodiversity and so on. I wonder what you found as it affects the climate crisis. Over to you.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah, it's on. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for listening to us here, for inviting me to talk to you. And I have to say it's a real honor, and actually I'm very excited to be linking national security to climate change and, in particular, biodiversity, which is my real passion. And we are here in a biodiversity hotspot here in Rwanda. It means it's one of the countries that has the most number of different species anywhere in the world, one of the highest places. And also what's interesting, for such a tiny country, we're still finding new species here, which is amazing, new to science, either range extensions or completely new species. But what I really wanted to talk about was that connection between climate change and biodiversity and the national security. And one of the things recently that's been in more discussion, maybe more in academic literature, but also in other venues, is the importance of linking climate change to biodiversity. So simply, biodiversity is all living things and their interactions. It's those interactions that give us services that we need. We talked about agriculture. We can't have agriculture without biodiversity, the pollinators and the natural predators of crop pests and things like that. So we are in this crisis time of climate change and biodiversity, and we are trying to get to resilience. And I like to talk about resilience, especially I work a lot with students. That's actually what gives me a lot of hope, is the young people. And before I end what I'm saying now, I wanted to get back to the young people and students. But in terms of resilience, I like to liken it to our bodies. And I think we all can agree, if our body is not feeling healthy, if we haven't eaten well or haven't slept well or we are stressed, we are less able to be resilient, meaning we may get sick, but it may last a very long time before we get well again. And resilience comes about when you have a healthy system. Your body is able to recover more quickly. And that's what we need of our ecosystems. That's what we need in every country, every location we have, is the resilience to climate change. So when the cyclones are entering, when these floods are happening, how do we build these systems that are more resilient, that can recover more quickly and lose less, be less harmed? I think that's one of the big challenges we're facing now. And part of that is through valuing more our biodiversity. And I think I can say Rwanda has done a tremendous job of really valorizing the biodiversity and trying to restore ecosystems, like you mentioned Nyandungu Eco Park. That was a wetland that had been very much turned into a different kind of system, and then returning it back to a healthy functioning wetland, which provides many different services that can help us be resilient and more prepared for these climate crises and disasters. And another thing I wanted to mention is that many African countries are very reliant on the biodiversity, on nature-based tourism. And that can also be a link to economic crises, because when, like we know during the pandemic, when tourism dropped, that had a big impact on major national economies. Also, climate change can have an impact not only on ecotourism, but also on human health issues. So that also puts a major stress not only on human populations, but also the services that governments provide, like our healthcare system, our clinics. So this really strains economies. So again, as many economies rely on healthy functioning ecosystems, what we try to do is get to these more resilient ecosystems, and then I'm bringing it back to biodiversity, making sure that we have these systems that have the complement of species that are contributing services that keep the resilience of those systems against climate change impacts, these shocks to the system. And some of the solutions, I think you mentioned, some of you mentioned that it's important to be positive about this, because sometimes it can be very scary or depressing when we look at these dual crises we're facing, these climate shocks. We're losing species at an unprecedented rate. But I'm a perennially positive person, and I believe there's many opportunities for us. And I think the military can actually be a model for what is positive. And one of the approaches, for example, is taking a nature positive approach. So in all the functions and the systems that are happening, whether it's in a military, whether it's in the education system, the finance system, whatever system you're talking about, being nature positive about the business you're doing means that you're taking into account the activities you're doing that are not having a negative impact on the environment or causing resilience of systems to be reduced, so more vulnerable to climate change. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the amazing opportunities for innovation. This is also something you were talking about, Teddy, is there's a lot of financing out there, and I think that countries really need to be ready. This is also where our young population is very, very important. And I have devoted my career really in academia to working with young people. I think it really keeps one young as well, or tries to. But I think that the youth really are going to have a tremendous role to play here. Coming up with innovations for how we are going to deal with these climate shocks, how we are going to get better at building resilient systems in all of the businesses that we do, again, whether it is the military or education or food production. It can be looked at as a cost, but it can also be looked at as an opportunity and accessing the finance that is out there. So again, it gets back to readiness. And I just want to end on one thing back to the military is that there's a lot of technologies that are out there. We as scientists, we want access to drones. It's very difficult to use drones to get good data in many different systems. And I think there can be more, there's an opportunity for more collaboration with the military. The military also has a lot of land that in many countries, military actually are the ones protecting a lot of endangered species and ecosystems. So I think there's really a lot of doors to be opened and more collaboration in that area. And yeah, that's what I wanted to end it on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one easy question for you, Prof.
Okay.
How hopeful are you that we can save the world?
How hopeful
Yeah.
are we that we can save? So what I can say is it's not possible for me to think other than that we can do it. I think it's just in my personality. I couldn't wake up in the morning and think, oh, another day and we're doomed. I wake up thinking, it's another day, what can we do? And I think we have to. That's the only course. We have to. We are in dire straits, but I think the human mind is capable of amazing things. We have done a lot of really bad things, but we have also done a lot of really amazing things. And I think we need to focus on the amazing things that we are capable of doing to solve this problem. And if these countries and communities and elders and youth can come together, we can come up with these kind of solutions. Yeah.
So these are your opportunity now for any questions, clarifications, issues that you felt maybe we needed to go a little bit deeper into. I'm going to throw the floor wide open. Your questions to any of our panelists. I'll just do 3 questions at a time so that we can exhaustively do that. If you have any comment to make, I would urge you to keep it quite short. And for very selfish reasons, I would like to also prioritize our students as well, so that they also have time to participate. So there are no modalities. It's hands up, questions, clarifications, comments, and then we're ready to go. Okay, please give us your name and we'll ask even the questions. Please be brief and the comments. We want to cover as much ground as possible. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Hadija Murangwa, and I am a senator. I work at the Parliament of Rwanda. First of all, I would just like to say I like the fact that it's 3 ladies up there, as opposed to the morning session. Thank you. Yeah, so I have a little bit of confusion, and I don't know who exactly is going to answer me at the panel, but then this is my question. Africa doesn't contribute 4% of the carbon toxins in the world, like you told us. And then you also told us that we are the most hit with the problem of climate change. And then we are struggling to reduce the emissions, and we want to reduce 38% in Rwanda, but then we don't contribute a lot at the end of the day by reducing the 38%. So my question, how much does the developed world reduce in terms of these carbon toxins? I think I don't have an answer to that yet, and I'd like to know what you're saying about that. Then second, the world doesn't allow us to get much of the cake. We were told, and correct me if I'm wrong, $4 are needed to keep 1% of the infrastructure damage in case of climate damage by climate change issues. But then, even if we get that, we still don't stop the rains. We don't stop the flooding. So we lose our food because agriculture is affected. We put insurance, it's not clearing much of the problem. I like the fact that climate change doesn't know the rich and poor. That's interesting. And you also said it doesn't have a formula, it comes anytime, even if you plan how. But then I can't also conclude without saying that I know about 4th July and the fact that our military in Rwanda is always part of the solution because they do imidugudu y'icyitegererezo. So those are our model villages. They're always IDP villages. They're always part of that initiative every 4th July, so we appreciate that. But then, like I said, the question is, how do we resolve the source of the problem? So we know that you're doing all these initiatives, you're looking for the money, you're wanting to stop the problem, the military is involved in Rwanda, budgets are being sourced, but what about the cause? If we are only contributing 4% of the problem to the world damage done by climate change, what about those contributing the 96? That's where I'm interested. Thank you very much.
Okay. Senator Hadija, thank you. Thank you for that. We'll take those 4 questions. I believe, Teddy Mugabo, you can deal with the finance issue. There was the emission. You will help us with that. Thank you very much indeed. And then solutions. I think I'll ask the panels to chip in on that. Okay, maybe let's start with the money if you're ready. It's always good to start with money.
Let me start from where it starts.
Okay.
Yeah, we got the emissions first, then we started looking for resources to
Please feel free.
turn it around.
Yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Hadija, for the very, very good questions. Some of them, I think we are going to ponder more about them. But here is, I just want to paint a picture so we understand where we are. They are big emitters, that's for a fact. And where do emissions come from? Emissions come from human activities. All of them. It could be agriculture, but mainly the industrialized countries. Transport sector, and so on. When we look at our own source of emissions, agriculture is generating the highest number of emissions. Yes, they are few, but when we look at the sectors, it's agriculture first and then transport. And the rest, of course, the industry sector is still at infant stage, so we don't have so much of that. And I think what I understand from your reflections is, why do we even labor to reduce the few emissions, and yet others are not reducing? So back to the opportunities that Teddy mentioned. The activities or the technologies of reducing emissions are actually putting me in a better place tomorrow. Other than constructing a building like this one, the convention center, without taking care of the emissions, source of emissions, I have an opportunity now to build the convention center the right way. So we don't have to fix it 30 years later. This is what the developed world is doing, because I think the model they used to develop wasn't climate sensitive. Right now they have to go back and fix the development model or approach that they did years back. So emissions are few that we are generating, but we don't want to grow economically as we grow with emissions. So we want to decouple the economic growth from emissions development. And when we speak this language, the developed world understands that kind of language better. And I'll be as honest as possible. Distinguished participants from the developed world would understand that better than I do, because for years, climate change negotiations were mainly interested in emissions reduction and less of resilience building, which was very unfair, by the way. It's not fair for you to talk about what is important for this part of the world and ignore the rest of the world. So together, the developing world, we had to make this voice heard. Rwanda participates in these negotiations, just like other countries, and we have put on the table that for us, it's more of resilience building than emissions reduction. But this does not mean that we are not going to pay attention to emissions reduction. More so because the resources that the developed countries have committed to provide are all coming in a sense of trying to repair what was damaged from the economic development that they registered. So I think I just wanted to give that balance. There is a very fine line that you have to understand, that you are not going to talk about resilience alone. You should also look at emissions reduction for my own good as a developing country, but also to contribute to the little. You don't want to keep on contributing to more emissions development. And this is why we have negotiations for over 3 weeks, people discussing this back and forth. But the philosophy of Rwanda is, if you can do what you must do for Rwandans to survive better, do it. This is where we come from when we put up institutions like the Rwanda Green Fund, because we know there are a lot of pledges in climate finances, east, west, south, but you can run endlessly looking for these resources if you're not strategic as a country. So we strategize by putting in place institutions like the Rwanda Green Fund so they can grow the muscle of resource mobilization, climate resource mobilization. I think Teddy and team are in the business of looking for these resources wherever they are. And that kind of specialization is helping us to actually be able to identify the opportunities amidst a gloomy situation that we are in. And when they come, they are all going for resilience development. Resilience development is not rocket science. It's the examples of projects that she mentioned of how do we make sure that we prepare for the floods. How do you prepare for the floods? By availing the area where water can rest when we have huge amounts of floods flowing. How do you rehabilitate the degraded wetlands? I think, again, this is an opportunity for us to explain why we have to labor to protect the wetlands, why we say 20 meters from the lake and from the river are protected areas, because we anticipate that we are going to have huger volumes of water flowing, and we need to create space for it to expand, to flow. And this is how the Green Fund comes in. We don't want that to remain as, a bush again. We want to, again, make economic value out of that has been protected. And this is where the story of carbon market comes in. If you've spent a lot of time, resources, protecting the wetland buffer and the lake buffer and the river buffer, which can go to up to lots of thousands of hectares, square hectares protected in Rwanda, how do you make value out of that? If someone from, I want to pick on a country X, developed world, wants to buy emissions that have been reduced because Rwanda has decided to protect these areas and wants to put maybe dollars to the Rwanda Green Fund, that is how we are going to get more resources to continue to multiply the resilience-related activities. So,
Okay.
Honorable, in a nutshell, I think that's the kind of game we are trying to play. A lot of balance has to be put in place, but I can only be proud of what the government of Rwanda has done by putting in place a specialized institution to look for these resources, and then let the rest of us do the regulatory role. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Just before I come to Teddy, I want to jump straight to CHIRISA to just wrap up this whole issue of resilience. And the reason I'm coming to you is because you're a planner yourself. You focus on, urban roads. Part of the challenge, I think one leader in Tanzania put it really well, said the river follows its course. It's you who's getting in the way of the river, not the other way around. So people who build on the wrong places, either through corruption or whatever it is, how do you address this issue of building resilience from a point of view of people can respect wetlands and these sort of things?
Thank you very much, Joseph. Well, in trying to answer this, I think I've got two models I would want to share. The first one is by one, he's American, but is a black American who has become a Ghanaian citizen called Senyo Ajiboloso. He talks of the human factor approach and asks 5 questions. So I think when we talk of resilience, we have to ask maybe at a very personal level, at institutional level, to say, number one, are we ready? So it's about readiness, but how do we become ready? That's the question. Number 2, are we prepared? Because being ready and being prepared another might sound connected, but they are different. Then the other is, are we willing? Willingness. Then number 4, he asks, are we able? Now the question of ability is linked to the 5th question. If you are able, then are you capable? So resilience is also about capacity, it's about awareness, it's about engaging. And like I indicated, that maybe we are one step in Zimbabwe by the master planning which we are doing, because master or planning itself, it has got several layers with national planning. Maybe a country needs to have a national plan, then regional plans, because countries have got different regions. Some are dry, others are wetter than others, etc. Then comes master planning, which is about maybe at district level, the different districts. Then we have local planning, which are specific to different sites. It can be, if it's an urban area, the CBD, a certain high density residential area, etc. Then there's what we call layout planning. So with this, I would say, again, there are about 5 stages. We talk of plan. Yes, the danger with the most plans in Africa is that they've always gathered dust, not implemented. So planning should come with commitment of resources, which include the funding which has been talked about. But again, resources, we come to Ajibol also. Do we have the capacity to allocate, manage appropriately? And are we willing to appropriately manage them in those sectors? So with commitment of resources, then we can see action on the ground, real action. If it's resilient buildings being constructed, yes, they are there. If it's about preserving wetlands, yes, there is that action. Then, but whatever action, it needs a constant review, and this review should be collective review. One thing which I liked about this, especially this model, it's the military or the security sector partnering with the civilians and the like. And you constantly review together rather than a one-man band. It's them doing it. It divides people to say it's them and us. Then the other, how we build resilience also, we should not just focus on ourselves. We should constantly engage locally, engage globally. Then I think with these stages, maybe my number 6 stage would be ritualize. Let it be a ritual. When I look at Kigali, I don't know the other parts, but when I just look at it, things like waste management, it's a ritual. You don't see any waste because it has become part of you. And that's where sometimes you want to engage anthropologists to tell you how to make people do what they would not ordinarily do unknowingly. And by that, you would have built the kind of resilience. There's one paper which I've read which it calls people as infrastructure. Maybe before we talk of this physical infrastructure, the people themselves, they are the basic infrastructure because they decide, they choose, and they can act.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I'll come to you, Beth. Sorry, Teddy, maybe, Beth, do you have a comment on that just before I move on to money matters?
Just something very brief. And regarding emissions, I think it's important to remember that there's carbon, methane, and other greenhouse gases. And even if today we stopped 50% or 100% of all emissions, we will still be experiencing climate change because of how the Earth has warmed and it's affecting the Earth systems, the jet streams and the melting of glaciers. So none of that will stop. It's like a pendulum swinging. It's got to go through its trajectory. So usually we talk about boundaries and going beyond the boundaries to tipping points where we get to a space where we can't come back to the normal functioning. That's what does get a little bit scary and where it's important to stay positive about it. But I think it's important to remember that for the emissions, there's more than carbon, and that we are going to have to be dealing with the issues of adaptation and resilience for a long time. And I just also wanted to mention that I think the fact that Rwanda is doing something about emissions and mitigation is exceptional and really acts as a model for what can be done. Because if a country with the aspirations like Rwanda can do what it's doing for mitigation, it's, at some point it's got to push the inertia for countries in the global north to say, something else can be done beyond what little they're doing currently. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Finally to you, Teddy. And if you tackle the question of damages, it's always a very touchy issue, but it would be good to explore that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Honorable Hadija, for the question. I believe Juliet really covered most of it. But just wanted to highlight a few things. So one, it is a shared responsibility. So it's unfortunate, climate change is happening. There's those who are, causing it. There are those who are affected. But at the end of the day, it still comes to shared responsibility. Although there's this shared responsibility between the global north and the global south, yes, it's true that some countries are one step ahead. And that's why we also, even as we sit here today, I've seen some of our partners, the Danish in the room. So there's also partners who have come on board to actually support us in this journey of adaptation. But I also wanted to highlight a few things. So just to highlight is that we need to be, we're doing, we have continuous efforts. We're really thinking, say, how can we mobilize money at even faster and volume? And so that's why I wanted to emphasize that although there's, we have the fund, we have a basket fund, where we're working with traditional development partners, attracting grants, but now we've even gone to the private sector. So we started with the Development Bank of Rwanda. We managed to raise 200 million in 1 year versus 300 million that we had mobilized just with the fund over the last 10 years. When you look at what the Ministry of Finance is doing, it's also to say even our resources that we are, even the domestic, right? Because again, we can't afford, I think the cost of inaction is higher. So really the conversation has shifted to saying, okay, we need to be aggressive, we need to be positioning ourselves to attract financing, but even on the limited resources that we have in the country, how do we use them best? And I think the examples that have been given, if you're going to build a road or any infrastructure project, how do you make sure that you are taking into the climate change? So in terms of whether it's hydrological, how do you make sure that you go that extra mile to actually understand how much rainfall we're going to be expecting in 5 years, so that when it rains, it doesn't destroy the road. So it's really, it's a chicken and egg thing, but we don't have a choice, because if we don't do it now, we'll spend more money in repairing all these things. I think for me, that's what I wanted to really highlight, that, the cost of inaction is higher, so it's a matter of how do we continue working with our partners to mobilize the resources, how do we focus on private sector. There's a lot of money out there, especially when it comes to impact investors that are looking for, for investments. And I liked the point that the professor highlighted. Honestly, goes back to the readiness. Are we ready to absorb this money? Do we have projects? Do we have the absorption capacity? Do we have the fiduciary systems? Are we not? How do we make sure that there's no corruption? So, because it just can't be one way. You need to also be making sure that, if someone is here to give you money, do you have all the transparency? Is it transparent? Do you have the systems? And, not to tarukwira, but I think that's why we've also been managed to, looking at Rwanda, because of the transparency and all the, everything that we've put in place, that's why we're also able to actually even mobilize the funding that we've been able to mobilize. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I want to give opportunities to people at the back, especially, who sometimes can be invisible. Any hands up? If we have a microphone. If you could please ensure that you stand and give us your name, keep it short, and if you're directing it to any particular person, please let us know. At the back, yes, there's one hand here, please.
Thank you very much, Joel. My name is Enchidanso Vladimir. Please stop there, don't add Putin. I'm a teacher, and this field is very dear to me. 30 years ago, it was like fun. People were doubting whether this climate change thing is a thing to be talked about, and that it was unscientific. But today, it's the focus of attention, which was good. I would like to applaud the erudite presentations by your panelists, but what I felt was lacking was they didn't put much fear in us. The security dimension didn't come much. But if you look at the problem, the whole mankind is dependent on how fast we are deteriorating the earth itself. So that security dimension didn't come much. And I'm not ready to go too far on that. myself. But then Dr. Musunda also decided to place emphasis on the role of the military in building resilience and helping, which is very good. But in my own estimation, building resilience and helping in climate change security problems cannot be put on the military alone. There is always this interagency cooperation and assistance, or whatever you call it, cooperation and collaboration, in the sense that whatever the military would do, they would need the assistance of the general public, one, two, of the police, ambulance, health, even the prison officers and whatnot, because it's a whole gamut of operation. So I will insist that, number one, the first thing we need to do in all countries, which I think Rwanda is doing best, and one cannot fail to be astounded by their progress, is that we need to make sure that people understand this climate change. So the population must be aware. So first, awareness creation is very, very important. It's 90% of the work done. Then early warning systems must be in place in such a way that we are able to know when and what. Thirdly, as I said, there must be a situation where there is always this cooperation and collaboration among agencies. So interagency cooperation and coordination. And finally, there must be a disaster management fund, which was mentioned by one of the panelists. The fund is very, very important. Our sister over there is talking about getting it into the private sector. It's important. It took me about 10 years to get my government to establish the fund, because we were always knocking from the institution where I am, pushing government and doing simulation exercises to show them what's needed in order to establish that fund. So I believe that if countries are doing this, we'll be somewhere there.
Thank you, Vladimir. Good to see you again. Those were more of comments, but I'm sure I'll get input from the panel. Any other questions as we move on? Yes, please. Right here in front. Yes, please.
My name is Major John Murunziza from Rwanda Defense Force, Senior Command and Staff College. I'm a student there. My question goes to Professor Chiri. Basing to the video highlighted by you, a moderator, and the presentation from Ms. Juliet, I want to ask about what are specific strategies and policies can African governments implement to build resilience against the impact of climate change, particularly in the areas of agriculture, water resources, and public areas. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. I can take another one. I think there was another hand here in front. Okay, let's deal with that. So specific policies, strategies, I think people are looking for concrete things that can really be done. And also to the panel, I think Vladimir's point is that you have not put enough fear into people. He's looking for fear. How do you press on the urgency of this situation? Are we doing enough? There's that whole thing about sensitization as well. So who wants to go first? Please.
I don't know about fear, but I know what you mean, that we want people to act. But I can say there are some simple things. When I was walking here to the building, there were all the large SUVs parked in the parking lot as I walked by. From many of you had been delivered by those vehicles, and they sat idling, emitting. And there has been research on if we could stop all of the idling, that's happening in our urban areas, how much emissions we would be reducing. That's just one simple thing that also affects human health. There's research in many places, and including the city of Kigali, showing that reducing emissions through stopping idling has a powerful impact on children's health and women's health, et cetera, people that are on the road when that emissions happen. So there's simple things that could be done. There can be self-audits and to look at your system's carbon emissions. The military could do that. They could look at how they're emitting, and then some steps they could take, as well as adaptive capacity, like again in their systems. So there are simple things that can be done. Maybe you need to feel fear first, and then you'll make that step. I don't know, but yeah.
It's switched on? Yeah.
It's on?
It's on now.
Thank you. Yeah, so I get where the professional teacher comes from with fear. I think sometimes, I don't know if we are going to treat ourselves like students, but fear is one thing, commitment is another, and behavior change is totally a different thing. In climate change, I think we are going to work towards behavior change to know how to live in a new world, basically, with all this that we are seeing around. So behavior change, again, is progressive. I appreciate the fact that you see that we now have settled with the science and know that climate change is here. So how we are going to tackle behavior change is going to be maybe not uniform for all Africa, for all the world, but you're going to understand your community. You're going to know how to communicate to your community. What we are doing right now in REMA, maybe I want to share that practical example. We used to come across really mainly as, you know, that institution that wants to create a lot of fear. And it works for some time, but it doesn't work all through. So we want to have the blend. We want to have that side of, you know, being tough, regulate, fines and all that, but we also want to be the institution that is teaching, educating, raising awareness, and in all different approaches, using the different models. The way we relate to the community like this one is going to be different from the way we relate to people down in the village, our mothers, our grandmothers. Maybe they prefer being talked to through skates. For people who stay here know what Runana is, and people kept on coming to us, why don't you use this platform? It has a lot of listeners, and people like the way the message comes across. And guess what? Now we are there, and we are trying to make sure that the message is coming through in a very friendly but consistent, and in a way that communicates to the day-to-day issues of the people down in the village. So behavior change, I think that is what we are working at, and we know it doesn't happen today, but with consistent efforts, we are seeing a difference. Major Nkurunziza, I think, asked specific strategies and policies needed to build resilience in agriculture, water resources, and public health. In agriculture, the agriculture that we talk about mainly in Africa is subsistence agriculture. It hasn't taken us really far, to be honest. We also need to make sure that we see how to change this and do commercial agriculture, look at high-value products instead of depending on, we need the food crops, but we also need to look further than that. So how you build resilience around that is, you know, you might get rains in a short time. So you want to look at the variety of seeds that you're going to use. You cannot use the same seeds that need 4 months, yet meteorological data tells you that you're going to have rains for 2 months. So the communities also need to understand using meteor data, and we are calling this climate smart agriculture. So that's a policy that we have to make sure sinks in the simplest words or language possible. What seed varieties are you using? But do you have to grow maize yet you can grow probably carrots. I'm just random examples. Yet you can grow carrots and make some considerable revenues that you can have even during the drought, so you can be able to purchase what you need for food crops. We know of countries that do minimal agriculture, but they have, made sure that they have enough adaptive capacity so they can buy food from everywhere in the world. So I think we are talking about knowing the variety of seeds, using meteo data, but making sure that we also embrace irrigation systems that are water efficient. We don't have to use too much water, so that technology will come in. I'm trying to enumerate policies randomly, but if you're cognizant of the problem, then you're going to look for the solutions, and you cannot do the same thing every day and expect to find something different. If you lost your harvest last season due to droughts, you cannot start to think that next season is going to be much different if you don't do it differently. When it comes to water resources, I think I was trying to talk about water efficiency. To use the little water that we have, I think we are not in a water scarce. Rwanda is not one of the water scarce countries, but I know in the team here, maybe we have delegates that are coming from countries where water is an issue. So on the contrary, in water resource related the sector, we want to develop policies around water harvesting. Can we store all the water that we have to be used for later? Because the water that we think is creating issues can at the same time be very necessary in making sure that we have agriculture year in, year throughout the year, but also use this water for other purposes. So we are looking at integrated water storage for different purposes, for energy generation and so on. You also talked about public health. I think I'm looking at public health and climate change in a sense that we need to raise the awareness of the people to be aware that there are diseases that are showing up now just because of climate change. Research shows us that we used to have little to minimal malaria cases in Musanze, for example, and these are coming up the numbers are increasing. So how do we come across to inform the people in that region that you're now going to be able to do this? You need to do away with the stagnant water, you need to do the mosquito nets and so on, yet it wasn't in their daily lives. So I think it's just understanding how to communicate to the different areas, but on a policy level, we need to be intentional about pushing these strategies, which end up in projects like the ones the Rwanda Green Fund funds. I know you know about the water harvesting plants that we are developing. I think in the east we have one in Gabiro, but we also have others in different areas. So to mention but a few, but consistency is the name of the game. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just before I go back to the audience, there's a question I want to throw it at you, Professor CHIRISA, just picking on you really. We're seated in a national security symposium talking about matters of security in the presence of the men and women who take care of our safety and security, but this still seems removed from what we're discussing here in terms of climate crisis. When you have issues, for example, of competition of water resources, land resources, and others, things that could, today, if you try to mess around with the waters of the Nile, you could provoke an act of war between nations. I wanted you to put some urgency. What is it that we're not touching on? And for the men and women in uniform, how do they prepare for these challenges of the future, security challenges of the future, which emanate from the climate change crisis?
Well, yeah, maybe it's still something like a distant question, like just like 30 years ago, if you would talk about climate change, people would not take it seriously. But I think it's really within the hands of the men of the military to start, maybe start now, we talked about readiness, to delve into these issues about the impacts, because like I indicated earlier on, you mentioned hydropolitics around water resources. And there's a book, it's called what? The Water Manifesto. It says future wars actually will be around the resource called water. Water is the future gold. And where there is gold, really there are rivals, there are conflicts, and preparing to ensure that there is peace around this resource called water, to me is very important. I have seen, maybe in my country, there was a time, the land issue, it provoked a lot of conflict. Well, it was a second liberation, the economic liberation. And who knows, the youth which we're talking about, they may say, we see a lot of you, the elderly, you are sitting on our resources and we want them. And it can cause a revolution around resources. So where we are going, where the majority, especially the youth, they don't have the means, it's likely to provoke such struggles. And well, at this point we may sound theorizing, but during that time it becomes really a reality. You remember the 2011 revolts in Libya? It was about the youth, and it was about the resources. So I would also basically say, when we look at, because maybe from a planning point of view, you showed the leafy suburbs facing challenges. Now, when you look at the most vulnerable are the poorest, and these are sometimes forced through environmental migration to move from the rural areas to the cities. And there's also a book by who, he talks about the revolutions about the peri-urban areas. Because someone comes to the city, the cost of living is high, but in the peri-urban, it's cheaper, and decision to move into the peri-urban because it's cheap, but they don't have the resources. What type of structures also do they build? Poor structures, they are affected. And when real disaster strike, the civil protection men becomes the military with their helicopters and like to evacuate. So, well, we may not have put enough fear, but I think those are some of the indicators that the challenges which we are experiencing now, they point to us, men in the uniform, getting ready with the equipment, with the knowledge, the know-how, the awareness that people were talking about. Well, I'm sure when there is peace, mass education also should also be the major thrust, and they already have business enough to do.
Yes, please, you can through before I move to the floor.
Yes, thank you. I think this is really interesting because I think even when I received the invitation, I was really trying to think, how do I link climate change to security? But something, as you were talking, just came to my mind. And just taking an example of the energy sector, I think if we look at the concept of energy self-reliance, I think especially for the countries that don't necessarily have oil, where it might be cases where there's still a level of importation of oil from a different country. I think where this conversation becomes interesting on the cleaner technologies, could we invest in our own, how do we ensure that we are producing energy domestically so that tomorrow, if let's say we're importing oil to complement what we have locally, we have an issue with this country then and decides to cut it off, that becomes a security issue. So I think I'm just trying to really link, but some of these things, I think when it comes to climate change and looking at especially energy, if we could also, if we have the energy self-reliance, but also using the cleaner technologies, investing in our own domestic, power generation, then, Kagachiro, the self-reliance, how do we make sure that you're not relying on someone else whom you don't know how things are going to change in a crazy world? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, panel. I'd like to seek the wisdom of the crowd as well for our men and women in uniform preparing to get into active duty. How are we preparing for the conflicts of the future that might be climate provoked or climate related? At the moment, one of the biggest, for example, in my own country, I think someone talked about sensitization. A lot of people who died in the flooding died because they did not believe, including a senior police officer who chose to drive through a very flooded road and thought that my car is heavy enough, I'll be able to cross over. So that it's that kind of bravado that got a lot of people killed on motorbikes, on trucks, on cars, because you feel we can get across. Again, a lack of knowledge. So the question is, how are you preparing for these kind of scenarios for the future where it's moving away from the conventional kind of, warfare or conflict? How are we preparing for that? This is a question to you. Any comments, any thoughts would be useful as well, because you also have thoughts. Any hands at all? Yes, if we can have a microphone right here, please, in front. On the front, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator. I had introduced myself. I don't know whether I have to do it again. I want to throw some light on climate change security nexus. There used to be a narrow sense of defining security. This was the traditional way of defining security and security threats. At that time, traditionally, the security threats were about enemy crossing borders. Actually, that's why they used to talk of the role of the army was about protecting national sovereignty. That means any cross-border interventions, and they used to say that really the role of the army is just to protect the borders of the country. That was the traditional narrow sense of defining security and security threats. Now, these days, and for some time back actually, we now define security in a broader sense. Anything that impacts on human life, we regard it as a security threat. So that's why climate change comes in. Now, they have talked a lot of the impact of climate change, the floods, disasters. All those have an impact on human life. Death, poverty, socio-economic well-being, all those are impacted on by the climate, have been and continue to be impacted on by the climate change. So these days we define security in that broader context. Anything that impacts on human life is a security threat. That's why we're now talking in this forum, the terrorism. We are talking of all those things are impacting now on human life. The famine caused by climate change, all those impact on human life. So the broader sense of definition of security and security threats now include climate change. So climate change now is defined as also regarded as a security threat. So that's the nexus, the security environment nexus. So it's very key and very important these days, and that's why we are looking at it today in terms of security, contemporary security threats. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just in front, so I think you've had your hand up for some time. No, it's done. Okay, thank you. Other hand I cannot see. Sorry.
I've taken the mic, please.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, moderator. I've got a very small comment to make. First of all, my name is Dr. Opio Andala. I'm a lecturer at Mount Kenya University, now called Mount Kigali. Now, there's somebody, a teacher like me, who mentioned something about fear. And I think we did not understand him well. Fear is not always negative. Sometimes it is positive. Fear can be used to motivate positively when some action needs to be taken. So I want to clarify that to help my fellow teacher, that fear is not always negative. Number two, the same fear, moderator, you should have brought when you are talking about the flood in Kenya and those clips. I wish you could have brought Budalangi, and we see what happened there, Kano Plains, what happened in Madare and how people died, and also places like Tana River, and we see how people died. This will bring fear, and this will make some of us take climate change seriously. Number two, I'm very happy that Rwanda is doing something about planning or the framework they have put in action. I must say something here that people are ignoring or are afraid to talk about. Military or disciplined forces may not succeed if there is no political goodwill from the leaders. This is because leaders control all the resources. It may be financial, human, and material resources that some of these military people will need to take action to save lives in cases of such places like that I've mentioned. Again, we see this when the professor mentioned about where the military was called in Zimbabwe, but things did not work well. He was almost telling us that the material resources that were meant to help in this action were maybe diverted elsewhere. Maybe that is what he meant. Ladies and gentlemen, most African leaders, and we must tell them, they divert funds meant for climate change, meant for mitigation to other areas that don't need any urgency. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I have room for just one more comment or question before we wrap up. If there's a hand I can't see. Yeah, please.
Thanks. Thanks, moderator. My name's Karin Zikarach. I'm a retired Lieutenant General. I would like to be advised on the dangers that are posed by politicization of climate change. I'm pretty sure very soon, when we start following the campaigns in the US, for example, we'll have different views relating to this climate science, depending on which side of the divide the political contestants will be. We have seen this in Europe. I do not know if it is the elites, the party elites that influence the thinking of their voters, or if the voters vote following the policies of the various political parties. But the question I would want to get advised on is how much of a danger, how much of a risk is this politicization of climate change to actually climate change? Do we see politicization of climate change causing even more trouble for the environment? Or is it something that we should not be worried about? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll use that as a closing question. I'll ask my panel to please give your closing remark, and if you can also respond to that or any other. You have about a minute or so that we end on time. Let me start the other way around. Let me start with the ladies, Prof, so that you can breathe a little bit. So, Juliet, over to you, and any other thoughts that you may have to as we close.
Thank you. Just to reflect a little bit on politicizing climate change, it's very hard. I don't think I could advise like you requested, but to do a small reflection is, we also saw this in, thank you for coming up with a name of the US. I think we didn't want to mention any names, but even when we saw what we saw in the past campaigns, elections, where we see a certain group of the country pro-green, others not pro-green, I know that even with that kind of discussion or narrative, down at the private sector level, they are doing work that is responding to the issues of climate change. So this can be a surface discussion, but deep down, I think there are economic-related reasons as to why a given party is pushing for being less ambitious when it comes to climate change, going ahead to retract the membership from the Paris Agreement, but this does not stop the industries, the manufacturers of the green technology to continue progressing. I think even during that regime that retracted from the Paris Agreement is when we saw a lot of clean technologies being manufactured. So I think it's a matter of looking at what is more important for us as Africans, because other parts of the world developed world can have this debate sometimes back and forth, but at the end of the day, I think the economics is what takes precedence. Where am I going to get more revenues, but where am I going to get more voters? And again, we just need to know where we want to stand as Africans, regardless of this debate and talk that sometimes swings left, swings right, but does not exactly respond to my mother's need at the end of the day. So parting words, I think we can have this kind of discussions, very fruitful, very helpful, but if we don't do something different, I think we'll not make a difference again. So I know I'm speaking to leaders and future leaders maybe in your respective capacities. The important part for me is to look for what we are going to do different. In Drucker's words, Peter Drucker's words, a known author, is the one who asked, what are you going to do different on Monday? If we can figure out what we are going to do different, wherever we are working or studying, I think that's where we are going to see something different. Just can we think about a climate change strategy in the RDF, for example? And what does that mean? What is it going to add to the green growth agenda that Rwanda is implementing? I know we are seeing a lot of activities in this space by the men in uniform, but what are we going to do different should be my parting words. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. In about a minute, please.
Just to reflect on that's a very good question, but a tough one. In regards to the politicization of climate change, I think I think we just need to focus on the data. I think the data is there. When you look at the past, let's say 20 years ago, when the climate science was still, being discussed, it was seen as something that is for the future. But now that it's here and the data is here, yeah, I think we just focus on the data, and then we all come collectively and agree on what we're going to do, whether it's at the political level. And as I conclude, I think really emphasizing that this is a shared responsibility, and most of the people highlighted that we need to have the political will, we need ambitious strategies, we need to be ready. And I think that's what, again, not to brag, I think that's what Rwanda has done very well. It's prioritized climate change at the heart of our development. It has been very, very intentional in terms of putting in place, whether it's REMA that's looking at the regulation, whether it's the fund that's attracting the funding, but also, again, making sure that we have the fiduciary system, so the readiness, making sure that when the money comes, it's implemented, and it's also improving lives. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Beth, over to you in a minute.
Thank you. I can say for closing remarks that valuing nature leads to supporting human livelihoods. That leads to resilience, supporting resilience to climate change. And as we heard from one of the audience members, that's at the heart of the nexus of security and climate change. So nature, climate resilience, security. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Comrade CHIRISA.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think when we look at it, the realities of climate change impacts, we are living with them. So to really doubt that it's happening, well, it may be a matter of choice, but the realities are with us. And what is required is a systems approach. Of course, there's also a question of attribution, because among the other factors, climate change also is there. There are human factors, but we really see when it happens. So I would say countries in Africa need to invest in spatial planning. I have a colleague who is in Sierra Leone right now. They say their last spatial plan was sometime in the 1960s. And they've just started resuscitating planning, because the countries are experiencing heavy rains. At this moment, houses are built haphazardly. So with clear planning, it brings clear engineering, which also brings the resilience that we are talking about. So I would say the military people, the security people, for us, they are the force behind the thing called resilience. They train when there is no war, they still train. So resilience building is about, why don't we train our minds to think that there is a force to fight? Why don't we train our people, our children, even our institutions, to be focused and see the enemy, even if you are not seeing it quite well, but see the enemy. It's there. Engage in nature-based solutions, as advocated by my colleague here, green solutions, but above all, it's leadership that makes everything easy when they apply governance approaches, transparency, accountability, the rule of law, and then it's possible then to enforce right codes, right resources when it comes to a real crisis. The Chimanimani disaster, which I talked about, when it happened, people thought it was, people were not given, well, it was said in radio, but they thought it's just another story. But when it really happened, then they were crying foul, why didn't you push us? So the military men, you are there to push us still, and we need you. You are that force to reckon with. to make things happen in any country.
Prof, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I'll ask you to please join me in thanking the panel for today. And in closing from myself, Dr. Pio, thank you for that feedback. I chose those clips deliberately. I didn't want to show the obvious places where it's always flooding and nobody ever does anything about it. My point was to show the rich also cry. To RDF, not me, but those ones. To RDF, I would like to thank you so much for giving us this opportunity, me specifically. I think if I keep coming like this, is there a rank like assistant junior private that you can give? Yes, please, but without drill. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for your patience, and the panel is now come to a close. Thank you so much.